All right, hello everyone. Getting some feedback from Eliza over here. All right, so just before we begin, and I'll give you a bit of an introduction to myself and the team who will be here to run today's event, but we'd just like to open with an acknowledgement to country and particularly to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that we live and work on here at Halad to Health, which are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and would like to also acknowledge their connection to the land, the water and the community, and acknowledge that this is their land. So welcoming you all here. My name is Sarah. I run the GAMSAT services and some of the other med entry services we have at Halad to Health. And tonight we'll be running you through one of our mini mocks. Hopefully you've seen a few of them before. If you haven't and this is your first, welcome. And we're excited to have you here. So just before we kick off, for anyone who this might be their first time coming along to a Halad to Health event, just to let you know that we're actually not predominantly a GAMSAT company, but we provide our GAMSAT tuition for Halad to Health, which is a not-for-profit, which run out of Australia and the Philippines, and we run health missions, health education missions in the Philippines. So that video that Eliza just showed you is some of the things that we did during COVID when we couldn't be doing things in person. We ran some online open classrooms so that we could still engage the students, and they were very successful. And so we've had quite significant social impact because of our GAMSAT services. We've been able to raise a huge figure of over $20,000 to help us to complete our goals in the past year, and we continue to hope to grow and make it even better in the future. So thank you so much for coming along, and we hope that you get something out of our GAMSAT services and your experience with us. So we'd like to just introduce the team that you'll be working with tonight. So you have me. I'm going to be running you through section 2. I'm the head of the GAMSAT here, and if you have any questions, you're always welcome to send me an email or ask about our courses, ask about experiences other students have had with us, and we'd be happy to answer anything. We also have Gabby, who anything that you'd like to know about Gabby, probably the top thing is that she knows how to make awesome almond milk. So please ask her about that. But more importantly, she's also fantastic at section 1 and 2 of the GAMSAT, and she'll be running at section 1 this evening, and I'll be handing over to her in a minute. And then we have Karim, give us a wave. And Karim will be running section 3. He leads the section 3 program at Halad and also tutors in section 3. And he is our gym go-to if you want any questions about how to up your fitness game this year. So you can also email him about that. I'm sure he would be thrilled. So just before we kick off and I tell you exactly what's going to be happening, I just wanted to take a moment to tell you a little bit about what the GAMSAT is like for me particularly, and why I do what I do here at Halad. So something that is so important to me is making sure that all of you who have big dreams, just like I did and just like I still do, have opportunity to access those dreams. And one of the things that does stand in the way is it's really hard to access GAMSAT services, which are both affordable and where you feel like you're cared about and your tutors actually are there to mentor you and listen to you. And so that's something that we really believe in, and we're here for you and we want you to succeed. And we've had a lot of positive interactions with students who've worked with us and who we've been able to see them achieve their goals, and super proud of them. And actually this email, which was put in these slides a little while ago, is from one of the first ever students I had doing GAMSAT with Halad, and she's now starting med this year, which is super exciting. So just to let you know what we're going to be doing, we will start off with section 1. You'll have 15 minutes to do 12 questions. Eliza will be sending through some links in the chat, so make sure you have the chat open. And then once you've done the questions, the tutor will go through, for each section, we'll go through some results and we'll explain things. If they don't get through everything, that's okay. You'll get sent full explanations afterwards, and you can always email us questions if you're confused. After that, you'll have 20 minutes to write a section 1 prompt. I will give you a little bit more information about that when we start, and then I'll go through someone's response and also some tips on the prompt that we look at tonight. And then Karim will do similar to section 1 for section 3. You'll get to do 12 questions and then you'll get some explanations. And at the end, you'll have a bit of time to reflect and let us know if you have any questions, give us feedback, anything that you like. And so just before we begin, I would love if you could put in the chat how you're feeling about the GAMSAT right now in this moment. if you could give me a 0 for I feel absolutely screwed and a 10 for I feel excellent, I'm going to ace it tomorrow. If you could put in the chat how you're feeling right now. Cool. Okay, so we're going up. We had 4 zeros, some 3s, some 4s, 2s, another 0. Oh, we've got a peak. We've come up to 5. Nice. Oh, it's 2 5s. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm feeling like an average of 3 here. Hopefully after tonight, you might not feel like you've accelerated your zeros up to a 10, but hopefully you'll feel like there are some resources here available to you and that this is a great sounding board that you can use. So fingers crossed, you definitely don't need to feel screwed. Everything's going to be okay. I can promise you that much. So on that note, I would love to hand it over to Gabby now, and she's going to start you off with section 1 and have your chat open, and Eliza will send you the link to get started. Cool.
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. As Sarah so lovely introduced us all, my name is Gabby, and I'll be running you through section 1 today. Eliza's already sent the links through. So the first document is the one that has the questions and the units. And the second one is where you need to submit your answers. So make sure you do submit your answers through that document so we can see how everyone goes and see which questions are the trickiest ones that we need to get through on the end. Oh, can no one hear me? Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yep. Just Sarah can't hear me. That's okay. Audio is fine. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. All right, so I might just share a timer now so you can all keep track of your time. Oh, I cannot share while Sarah is sharing. I don't think she can hear me. Sorry.
You're all good. I'm just gonna, I thought I gave you permission to share, but it mustn't. I'll just re-give that. Everyone take a breath.
Get your hands ready. Do some hands. Get ready to crunch those keyboards.
All right, try that now.
All right, here we go. Ready? I'll give you a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Time starts now. I don't think you heard the buzzer go off, but luckily not because it was really loud. So if you could all put all of your questions into the submission, if you haven't already pressed submit, please do, so I can have a look and see which questions you struggled with most. Okay, we've got 35 responses at the moment, so I'll give you all a couple more moments to press submit, and you can just have a bit of a breather. And if you didn't get time to finish all the questions, don't worry. There's actually a few more questions in this mini mock than there was last time. So it's a bit more of a challenge, but just press submit with what you've got and click a random option if you have to, that's okay. But we have 37 responses now. So I might just share my screen and it will just show the distribution of the marks. You will get sent this after class as a final one, but this can give you a bit of an indication on where you're sitting. So as you can see, highest score was 12 and lowest score was 6. And then we've got lots of individuals in the middle there as well. So that gives you an indication of where you're sitting. And I'll just have a look at the most frequently missed questions. So we've got question 4 and 10. So I'll grab my document up and we can work together off of that. Okay. So the first question, you guys performed quite well with this first text. I will just like to flag it here that lots of people overlook cartoons, thinking they are perhaps really easy marks. They don't come up too often in the GAMSAT, which might be true, but I highly recommend you do give them a practice because they are well, they're not always easy marks, but there are marks. So you may as well try to practice them because they will come up in the GAMSAT, whether it's just one unit or not. They do often come up, so don't overlook them. And make sure you actually spend time analysing the cartoon before you attempt the questions. Lots of students just sort of gaze at the picture and then move on, but spend time analysing it, even if it's just, 60 seconds. That 60 seconds you would have spent reading a text anyway that you don't have to read in this case. So make sure you spend that time analysing the text. And these two questions were pretty straightforward. And if you understood the meaning of the text, these two questions you would have gotten correct. Asking about the main message in the first question, which is the key thing to get from the cartoon, and then the humour in the second question. So most students will be able to identify that humour is demonstrated in this text, but not all students can identify which type of humour it is. Okay, we've got a question from Vanessa. She's asked, was that accurate to how much time we get per question in the real GAMSAT? I believe it was, Vanessa. Sarah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah. So usually we say about 1.5 minutes per question. So not per text, per question. Okay. All right, so now we'll go down to Unit 2. So this is a poem. I really liked this poem and I thought it was quite easy to interpret compared to other poems I've come across and other poems that students struggle with because it's something we can relate to personally. We've lived through a pandemic. So it's something that even if you maybe couldn't relate to it too much, you had an idea of what it was talking about and the setting that it was in. So I think that really assisted in how you understood it. As well as that's something that I want you to do, even if you read a poem or a text that you feel like you can't relate to, try to relate it to yourself and your life, and you might find it easier to interpret that way. I certainly do anyway. But moving to question 4, as this is one that a few people have gotten incorrect. This is asking about if someone was to critique this poem, what would be an appropriate criticism? This is a little bit of a difficult question, I think, because you could say that anyone could critique a poem for any reason. However, the question, what it's really trying to test is whether or not you've understood the meaning behind the text and the purpose behind the text. So all of these options here are relatively valid responses. However, the most correct answer is option, am I correct? Sorry, I'm just working off my iPad here as well. Is A. So cannot predict what is going to happen after the pandemic. So this entire poem, it just talks about what if. So it's asking what if this was to happen? What if children were to actually gain all of these soft skills in isolation that they wouldn't have gained otherwise at school? What if they were actually advanced in these soft skills that they wouldn't have gotten from school? So they're sort of really predicting, but just sort of brainstorming what is going to happen after their pandemic. However, as stated, they can't really predict what is going to happen after the pandemic. They can only instill this hope that children will gain these other things in isolation. And they're sort of, the whole purpose of the poem is hoping for that and being hopeful that these children will learn despite being in isolation and not going to school, what they would usually do. So it is a fair criticism to say that the author can't predict what is going to happen after the pandemic. Lots of people, I think, would have chosen B. should not instill unfounded hope, because the whole poem does instill hope. However, option A is a more correct answer, as it gives evidence as to why this hope should not be instilled. So it's because they can't predict what's going to happen after the pandemic. So it is unfair to say that, you know, what if this was to happen and they were to grow, when no one is to know what is going to happen. We haven't lived through this situation before, and I don't think anyone can accurately predict what's going to happen with the pandemic, let alone after the pandemic. So A is the most correct answer there. And C and D don't really make sense in terms of the poem's purpose and the ideas that the poem is portraying. So hopefully that clears that one up a little bit. If you chose B, that's okay, but think about why A is the more correct answer. And it's because it just holds more sort of evidence and more backing. So B is still correct, but A is the most correct answer, which is what we're always looking for in the GAMSAT. You may have 4 options that are correct, but unfortunately, your job is to find out which option is the most correct. Okay. And going on from here, question 5 is a really important one, I think, that I would hope students would get correct, as it is something that is really key to the poem. This line, "What if they are ahead," is not only repeated throughout the text multiple times, but it is also used sort of in the title. So it is really important for the poem's overall meaning and purpose. So the correct answer for this one is C. I think some people might have thought that D could be the correct answer as well, because they do contrast the fact that children are learning from home now away from school. So that point is definitely noted. However, what if they are ahead? It's talking all about those soft skills that I mentioned earlier. It's not talking about intelligence and whether or not the kids are getting smarter at home, like better at mathematics and English and all of that. It's really talking about those personality traits that these students, that these children are learning at home, you know, the ability to appreciate family more, to appreciate things like their home, a home cooked meal and spending time together, that sort of stuff. So it's really brainstorming this idea that maybe children will gain a lot through the pandemic. It might not necessarily be good marks or whatever that is, but maybe they still will gain more than what they will lose. So C is the most correct answer here. Okay, we have a couple of questions. Anne has asked us to go through question 2 as well afterwards. I was down to A and D, but wasn't sure. No problem. We can go through that at the end, and I'll just answer Matt's question because it's related to this one. So Matt said, where in the poem is indicated she is talking about a pandemic specifically? So this is a really important part. If you look just above the poem, it says the context behind the poem. And this is really important because I thought if students missed this, the poem might not have made much sense. So it's really important to read everything on the GAMSAT, not just the text itself, but also the title, which is really important as it can give you a really good indication as to what the purpose of the text is, as well as any other background info that's there. And this really gives that context for that. That's okay, Matt, all good. And AJ wants to go over questions 9 to 11. Yep, we'll get there after that. Thanks, AJ. And then the last 2 questions for these were pretty straightforward. I won't go through those ones for the sake of time. We'll move on to the next text. Okay, so this text had a few comments that you had to analyze and compare. This type of text can be a little bit tricky for students, I think. Some students find it hard to keep track of all the different voices that are in the text, which is pretty fair enough, I think. I think the best way to tackle this is to use that piece of paper that you get throughout the GAMSAT to write down 1 or 2 words to describe each comment. And that should be really good to sort of remind you of what the key points in those comments are about. Okay, so we'll skip question 8. We've got specific demand for questions 9, 10, and 11. So questions 9 and 10 are very similar questions asking about similarities and differences between comments. Again, very important that you've analysed each comment and the purpose behind the comment. You should have a clear idea as to what these speakers' opinions are on their topic based from these comments. Okay, so the first one, question 9, asking about the most similar comments. The correct answer is D, so comment 2 and 4. So these 2 comments are both talking about feminism and how women are perceived. So they're very similar in their views and the fact that women should be viewed as equal to men. And it's as simple as that, really. So those two are the most similar. And then 10, which comments are least similar or dissimilar? And the answer here is C, so comment 1 and 2. And the key thing here really is both comments are talking about not only opposing things, but are talking about the role of women and the jobs that women do in society. And comment 1 is talking about, what life was like for women in the 1800s, and comment 2 is very much talking about a modern perspective of feminism. And those two are polar opposite things. They could not get any more different than those two. So therefore, those two comments are the most dissimilar. And then question 11, I thought a few people might get trumped by this one. So how many of the comments connect a woman's action and or purpose to men? This is tricky because all comments talk about women or women's actions, but not all of them talk about their purpose to men. So the correct answer is 4. Because comment 2 specifically, see how this talks about women's actions and women in general, but it doesn't relate them to men at all and how men view them. It relates to men and how sort of women should be pictured the same as men, but not women's actions comparatively to men, if that makes sense. That's a real clear distinction. If that's still a bit confusing, I want you to reflect on that and think about the different language used in this question. It's specifically talking about how many of the comments connect a women's action and or the purpose to men. Okay. All right, and we'll quickly zoom up to the first question. I don't have much time left. Don't stress if you're still confused because you will get sent all of these later. But we had a specific question about number 2. So again, this is asking about the humor employed in the cartoon. So the correct answer is D, irony. Irony is basically saying something that is actually the opposite of that, and it's doing so in a witty or humorful manner. And the fact that the text here is saying the fake moon landing was built using actual soil from the moon, well, that's silly, because if that was real, someone would have had to go to the moon to get the soil. So in itself, it's ironic. And that is the key humor in this text, making fun of the conspiracy theorists, pretty much. And it's not highbrow. Highbrow is basically like, I like to think about it as posh humor, talking about intelligent things or using intelligent language in jokes or in humor. Okay. Any other last questions? No. Okay, perfect. Again, as I said, if you have any other questions, feel free to send me a message, but you will get sent the full explanations afterwards. So hopefully they'll help clarify things. But definitely make sure you reflect on that work. Make sure you figure out, okay, why did I get that question right? Or why did I get that question wrong? So you can really figure out what your weaknesses are and improve on those. And if you need some more guidance as to how to improve on specific areas, you should check out our free ebook. Eliza might have a link to send to you guys. And that has heaps of good tips on there about improving in section 1, specific to different text types as well. So if you know your weakness, that'd be good as well. And lots of other practice questions that you can give a crack. There we go. She sent it through now. Exactly predicted her September 2020 results for section 1. Yes.
All right, amazing. So thank you so much, everyone, for giving section 1 a crack. And woohoo, great prediction of September 2020 results right there. But hopefully that was helpful. And thank you so much, Gabby. And also, yes, the ebook has a lot of our tips in there and also some other questions if you want to give some more a try in your own time. And so hopefully that's helpful for you and you can go on and download it. So we are going to head straight into section 2. So not a huge breather for you there, but you'll have 20 minutes to write to the prompt. Eliza will send you the link in the chat. And with that, It's up to you how much you write. I would recommend writing an introduction / starting, however you usually start your section 2 pieces. And then if you can try and get around 2 paragraphs done, it's okay if you get only 1 done and it's fantastic. Whatever you like, wherever you're at, that's fine. Just write what you can. It's not expected that you'll write a whole piece in the 20 minutes. It's so that you can write something and get a bit of a feel for how you work with the prompt. And then we'll spend about 20 minutes going over some things to do with it and looking at a couple of samples that you've written. So if you're happy for us to potentially use yours, there'll also be an option to tick that in the form. So I'm going to share the timer for you. And if we can just get some thumbs up if everyone's ready to go. Has the form good and working? Fabulous. Karim, are you going to write one for us? Okay, great. All right, and we will start now.
All right, great. So what I'm going to do for the next 20-ish minutes is go over some general things to do with the prompt and to do with approaching section 2, some things that I find come up a fair bit. If you do have specific questions though, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get through those as well. And then we'll also have some of what you guys have just written. We'll put them up and we'll talk through them as well. And you can let me know if you have any questions about those too. So firstly, I wanted to go over what to do when you first get the prompt in your hands when you start section 2 of the GAMSAT. So obviously one of the things that is a little bit different to what we just did is you'll get 2 prompts and hopefully you'll be given the right prompt straight away. But so hopefully you all wrote to this prompt on the screen. If you didn't, that's okay. It's still good practice. Another thing that you will get other than getting 2 prompts, it's important to be able to laugh at yourselves. So other than getting 2 prompts is you'll also have the full time to complete 2 whole pieces. So it's so fine if you didn't today, we didn't expect you to, but those are the 2 main differences. Other than that, you should always be approaching the prompt the same way, regardless of how much time you have or how many prompts you're working with. And so it's going to look different for everyone because we all think differently and are different. But one of the questions I was asked last week and actually answered for a few of my GAMSAT students, so I thought I'd go over it quickly today, is do I have to write about one of the quotes? And if I do write about one of the quotes, can I ignore all the others? And unfortunately, it's not an easy yes or no answer to that question because it's a little bit more complicated. So I want to walk you through what to do with the prompt. So firstly, you do need to understand the prompt as a whole, not just as 5 individual quotes. When you have spent a bit of time with GAMSAT prompts, what you will notice is that whilst there are 5 separate quotes, or sometimes 4 separate quotes, they will all have a common theme that can be synthesized. So your first job is to work out what that theme is. It's really tricky at first because each quote will be its own self-sufficient, self-standing quote, but then they will all sort of be able to be grouped together. However, you can also write on one quote. If you choose to write on one quote, you must still write in relation to what the overall theme is. So I'll give you an example. From here, hopefully you were able to pick apart the quotes a little bit and realize that the overall theme here is around belief and people's belief systems and how they shape this belief system for themselves and basically how this then affects how they live. So if you got that it was about belief and belief systems, you're right on track. However, let's say that you then from there decided to pick a quote and you picked quote 2, not believing in something does not make it not exist. And then you went on to write an essay about things existing and existence and what it means to exist. Then you've veered away from that theme of belief and you're no longer talking about belief. So whilst you can talk about one quote, you still do need to understand the overall theme. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. The second thing is how to actually get there if you do struggle with getting what that overall theme is. And whilst this really does come down to practice, my biggest tip there is to spend about 15, 20 seconds looking at each quote individually, summing up what the quote is about, and then at the end, bringing it all together so that you can say what is the similarity between each of the quotes. If you can get that similarity to click for you, then you'll be fine, and you can use whichever quotes you want, or you can use none at all, or you can somehow use all of them. It's really up to you. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. And if you're still a bit confused about quotes and breaking them apart, my recommendation is to spend time doing this. The second thing I wanted to talk about is what do I actually do once I've worked out that theme? And the reason I want to talk about this really quickly is because it's a real common mistake people make. You really need to come up with a contention. So you need to ask yourself, what do I actually want to say about this theme now that I know what it is? So in this case, the theme being around like beliefs, belief systems, then come up with a contention about that. So I don't just want to read an essay that goes, belief systems. This is what a belief system is. Let me tell you more about belief systems. XYZ, here are 3 examples of belief systems. That's the end of my essay. Whilst that does address the prompt in theory and it addresses the theme, you actually haven't told me what you think about it. And that's a really common mistake to fall into without realizing that you're not quite doing the right thing. So I just wanted to briefly touch on that as well and say you do need your own contention on it and to bring your own ideas, and you should be introducing that contention at the start. So just before we move on to the student sample, we've got a couple of questions. So the first question is, so as long as you address the theme, you're on topic? Exactly. Yep. So as long as you address the theme, if you feel like you've addressed it in a way that's a little bit more out of the box, which is fantastic to do and enjoyable for us to read, just make sure you show how it links to the theme. So make sure it's quite clear, okay, this is how it's related to this theme. In this case, how it's related to belief systems. Should you actually include the quotes? You don't even have to mention that you saw the quotes in theory. So you do not have to include the quotes at all. If you want to, you can put it at the start. You can put a quote as your topic sentence. Do what you like with the quotes, but don't rely on the quotes to be your ideas. So if you do like to use the quotes, that's fine. Just be careful not to lean on them, but you definitely don't have to use them. We've got heaps of questions about the essays themselves, which I like. I know that section 2, a million questions crop up, and so grateful for people to ask their questions and trust us to answer them. So the first one is, must it follow an orthodox essay structure? And the second one, can you use I or we in the essay? I want to answer these together. So your essay, I use the word essay because people are familiar with that word, but it's a very loose word. The whole point of section 2, it's called written communication. That's the name of the task. And the whole point is for you to communicate what you think about this theme. So use the word essay very loosely because you can write in whatever style you like, which means also you can use I or we or first person, second person if it applies to the style that you're writing in and if it works. So I always say, what you have to say is so much more important than how you say it. And so if you're spending your time trying to write creatively or really like amazingly for the sake of it being an interesting style, don't waste your time on that. But if you prefer to write more casually and that gets your ideas across best, then go for that. And the last one before we move on to the sample, how many words can we write? This one's really hard, but you've got about half an hour to write each one. I'd say minimum 300 to 400 words, maximum 800. I wouldn't go up to like 1,000. That's probably a bit of overkill, but you can write something amazing with 400 words. You can also write more. It's up to you and how you sort of express yourself and how quickly you're able to write and synthesize your ideas. Okay, great. No worries. So if you do have more questions, still feel free to send them in. We'll try and get through as many as we can. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read this sample up here, and I'll give it a read as well. And then while you're reading, see if you can pick out something that's good about it and something that you would suggest to improve on it, just so that you have that in your mind as you're giving it a read, and then we'll have a chat about it. Okay, great. So let's have a little bit of a chat through this piece. So the first thing I will mention, I really love that this has taken a different angle on the theme and on the idea around belief. And it's about believing in yourself. And by having a belief in something, manifestation can enable it to actually happen. And so I really like this take, and it's very clear from the start that this is what this student wanted to talk about. The only thing I would say is what I mentioned before about make sure you show that link really clearly to the topic. I would just make it a little bit clearer why you've decided to take the angle of manifestation. So how does this link in with believing in yourself? I know it's here in terms of if you truly put your mind to something and believe in yourself, you will succeed. Just maybe putting in like this is the power of belief or something like that to show that you understand you're supposed to be talking about belief, and for you this means manifestation. So that would be something I would put in this intro here to strengthen that and make it really clear how you linked it to the theme. And the next thing that I really like is that this person has taken a personal approach. And this is a good time to answer this question in the chat, which is, does task B always have to be a personal essay? Can it be argumentative? So it can be absolutely anything you want. It can be personal. It cannot be. Task B tends to lend itself more to being personal because it will usually be about themes that you can relate to, such as emotional themes or themes like this, such as belief. And I'm sure a lot of people have things to say about their personal life to do with belief systems. So just like this person has, they've talked about how they believed in themselves and it manifested in their personal experiences, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to bring in something personal. And likewise with task A, if you want to bring in something personal, you can. So it's not a hard and fast rule of yes for task B and no for task A. So you can write in any style that you like. So something else that I like about this is this here, that they've brought in this straight away. Here's my example of why I think this. And then they've put in the impact here. After doing it for weeks and weeks, I was successful. It made me feel like I had the power to bring anything into my life. I really like this line, and I cannot stress this enough. So many times I will get students writing something magnificent, like here is my example, whether it's about themselves or something in the world or something else, and then they forget to explain why their example is important. This is great because it says the reason why my example is important is because it shows you how manifestation works for me. It brings things into my life. So make sure you put that final finesse on by saying, this is why my example is important. So I really like that. One thing I would like to bring up about this to make it stronger is these two paragraphs read a little bit the same. And I call this the shopping list method. It's when you get a little bit excited about what you're sharing or about your idea that you almost write the same thing twice. And so what has happened is they've written, here's an example. I got into university with a scholarship, and so I did manifest something in my life. And then here are some more examples of when I did that. And so it's really the same point rather than progressing the point to the next step. So my recommendation for that is if you have two awesome examples, see if you can fit them together in the same paragraph so that you can make them the same point, rather than making it look like all you could do is give me the same point twice. In terms of what happens next, I really love this, is that there's a rebuttal here. Absolutely, you don't have to have a rebuttal. It's totally dependent on your style and how you like to write. But what they've done is said, okay, yes, sometimes there are things that you cannot manifest. It's just not possible. If you say, I want this, and then you don't get it, well, does that mean manifestation actually isn't true? And so then they've sort of given this snippet of, well, if it's not paired with dedication and hard work, then it's not going to happen. So I really like this rebuttal because then it's followed up with a solution of, well, okay, fair, but you need dedication and hard work. So my recommendation to this person to sort of finish off this piece would be talking about what it takes to actually manifest something, since that's sort of what their piece is about. What does it take to believe in something and have it truly happen? Is it just believing in it, or is it also what they think, which they've sort of alluded to here, dedication and hard work? So great start. I really like this. The structure is nice. I hope something else you've all noticed is that it's quite neatly written, like it's concise and it's simple language. You don't need to write something really flowery for it to be good. So I'm going to pause it there for a second and just check the chat. Is there any indication of what score this would receive? I'd love to go over scoring because we've got about 5 minutes, so that would be great. Can do. And do we need examples in our paragraphs? Okay, so in terms of examples, yes, you need examples in your piece. We do say this quite loosely though. It's not the same as when you were in high school maybe, or wherever you learnt to write an essay, where you must have one example per paragraph and it must be from politics or current media or whatnot. You just need to have evidence to explain why you think what you do. So if you're writing a creative piece, obviously you're not going to use real world examples the same way as someone who's writing an expository essay or an argumentative essay. So if you are writing a more standard essay style though, I do recommend having good solid examples to use. We do talk a bit in our courses about having examples that you've curated through your passions. So my sort of examples would be related to things that I'm really passionate about, like public health, or even something a bit more left of center, like I'm really interested in fashion and horticulture. So I might write about something in that sphere rather than only writing about something that's in the current media. So do we need examples? The short answer is yes, but the longer answer is it doesn't have to be your traditional examples that you might write in other styles of essays. So get creative with them and practice writing about things you enjoy writing about. And that includes practice writing things that are personal examples or things that you've seen in your own life. So we'll go back to scoring, and because we've got a few more minutes, I'll break it down a little bit more for you. So what we look for when we score, I look for I sort of put it into two categories. So the first category is all about the content and what you've actually given in terms of your writing. And the second category is all about the writing itself and how it flows in the structure. So we'll talk about the flow and the structure first. When I'm reading one, like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we really don't mind if you are English as a second language, English as an alternative language, English as your first language, that doesn't matter. So you don't need amazing language or amazing English skills. What I'm looking for is something that flows really well, that it makes sense where you've put your ideas, that everything links together, and that it's really clear why you put what you did and why you left out certain things. So this one for flow and structure, I would give it about a 7 out of 10, which is great start. To push it up, I would say to just get rid of this like shopping list sort of structure here and group these more together and sort of rework that. And then obviously this isn't finished, but I would assume if it kept going with the same flow and conciseness, then that's fantastic and on the right track there. In terms of ideas and thoughts, I would also give it about a 7. What we're looking for is something where they're both giving ideas which link back to the topic, which they have, and that they're also giving complexity. So the complexity is getting there. To add a final layer of complexity, what I would recommend is talking about how manifestation has an overall impact, both on this individual and what they think the overall impact is overall, or just making that final comment on why they think it's so important and why they chose to talk about manifestation in the first place. So it's clear that it's really important to the person who spoke about it. I would then make sure to show that it's also really important in the broader world and that it's an important topic in general, because obviously you've been given this prompt around belief and belief systems because they want to know what's important to you and why you think it's important. So that's one thing I would suggest, or one tip that I always suggest, is I look for complexity in terms of the actual overall content in there. So overall, I'd give this essay about a 14 to 15 out of 20, which is a fantastic start. And honestly, some of my students, if they could get their essay up to this point, I'd be very happy. But those would be the things that I would improve on. And hopefully that was a nice little checklist, not only for the person who wrote this, but also for some of you who might have written something similarly or might be starting out and want to know what kinds of things to look for. So if anyone has any questions that you'd like to put in the chat about section 2, we have about 2 minutes left. While you're doing that, I'm just going to switch screens. Oh yes, of course, that was the final step I was supposed to then talk to you about. So then after we give you a score out of 20, we try and give a predictive score. I would give it a predictive score of about 63 to 65. So sort of like mid-range 60s. Sorry, that is the part that you all want to hear about the most, and the part that I forgot to share. All right, so just to finish that up, very good question, because I'm just going to share my screen now. And I wanted to quickly touch on 2 things before I hand over to Karim. So we do have a lot of questions about how can I get my Section 2 essays looked at? Can we get some advice on those and some more thorough feedback? And one of the things you can do is go onto this link and you can sign up to get some of your essays marked by our tuition team here at Halad. So we do run a Section 2 essay marking service. Also, if you hold out to the end of tonight's mini mock, we'll also have a bit of an offer for you to get some of your essays looked at as well, and we'll mark one for you. So there are definitely some options there for you to get some feedback from us and to see how you're tracking. So hopefully that's helpful for you. If you have any more questions about Section 2, feel free to email me or to put them in the chat and I can respond on the chat as well. And otherwise, I will pass things off to Karim for Section 3.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming today. As Sarah mentioned, I am the Section 3 leader here at Halad. So I do everything sort of in terms of Section 3. And yeah, thank you for coming along today. We'll get straight into it. So hopefully Eliza will send off the links for Section 3 stuff. And then we'll get a timer going. So that's the links there. So you've got the Section 3 questions is the first link and the Section 3 submission form is the second link. Don't forget to send submit. We really need you to send that so we can sort of analyze the questions and go through the most difficult questions that people tend to struggle with. So I'll share my screen. Okay. So give you guys a little moment to get onto those questions. All right, best of luck, everyone. I'll start your timer. You've got 20 minutes and we'll circle back. I think we picked a few tricky questions for you guys just to challenge you because we know that you're all very capable. Yeah, just feel free to submit those now. I'm just going to give you guys a few more minutes. There's only a few responses that have come through. Oh, they're all coming through now. Beautiful. So we've got 22 responses at the moment. So just waiting on a few more. Don't worry if you haven't finished yet. Just submit what you've got. Do random guesses, whatever it might be, if you haven't finished. Okay, I'll wait for the responses to get to about 30 and then I'll get started. Also, apologies, I might be looking down a little bit. I'll just be looking at my iPad. I might just need to write a few things while we're going through the explanations. Okay, beautiful. So that's about 30 responses there. So clearly these questions were quite tricky. So if you found them tricky, don't stress. They were very, very difficult. And some of them, you know, there's maybe a little bit of prerequisite knowledge there, but they were probably harder than what you'd expect to get at the GAMSAT. We had the highest response was around 7, down to about 2 out of 12. So they're obviously very tricky. In particular, let me have a look at which questions people found quite difficult. Give me one sec. Okay, so I think it's quite a bit of a range, but it looks like questions from 6 till 8 were probably the most difficult, and I thought that might be the case. So Unit 2 especially. So what I'll try and do is go through each module, through each unit, try to give you guys a basic summary of one of the ways they could probably tackle these questions and why they're sort of tricky and how you can get around that. So for the first question, it was all about bilirubin metabolism. There's quite a bit of information in the stem, and then you're presented with two very confusing looking tables, which, you know, can be a little bit off-putting when you first look at them, but there's actually a really simple trick to getting around these two tables. And I want you guys to think about the skills that you want to build whenever you're practicing GAMSAT questions. It's just a general concept. So for example, with these two tables, it's about putting information into a mode which is more easily digestible for you so that you can easily come up with a correct answer. So I'll show you one of the ways that you could do that. So for the first question, it's asking you to identify the order of the organs that the metabolites of heme move through. And that can be a little bit confusing at first because you've got organs on one table and then you've got the metabolites in the other table. And the tables can be really confusing. So what you want to do is change the mode of information from a table to a process, which will make a lot more sense. So what you can do is use table 1. You want to use the first two columns, so the compound column and the synthesized from column, okay? So if we start off with heme, which is the first component in the blood, right? Heme is at the top of the second column in the first table. And so biliverdin is synthesized from heme. So what you can do is you can write down heme. Sorry, this might get a little bit messy. And that then leads on to biliverdin. Okay. From biliverdin, we then look down on the second column of the table. So biliverdin is down here. It follows on that it's synthesized from unconjugated bilirubin. So that'll be the next thing. So unconjugated bilirubin, okay? And then after that, you just keep repeating this process. So then after that, you look for unconjugated bilirubin on the table. And so you've got conjugated bilirubin next. So conjugated bilirubin. And you would continue this process. And if you were to do that, you would end up with, let me write these down. Okay, I'll just write those down for now. Those are the main ones that we want to talk about. Then what you need to do is link the metabolites in the first table with what enzyme they are produced by. So what enzyme they're synthesized by, because that then leads you to whatever organ that enzyme is in, which gives you the order of the organs. So for example, heme is synthesized by heme oxygenase. If I go down to the second table, heme oxygenase is down here. So I know that the first organ is going to be the blood. So now I would write down another process. So blood is first. Biliverdin, right, is synthesized. Oh, sorry. So biliverdin was synthesized from heme oxygenase. Unconjugated bilirubin, if I look at the first table, it's synthesized via biliverdin reductase, which is also in the blood. So the next organ is still going to be the blood. And then we go into conjugated bilirubin. So conjugated bilirubin is synthesized via UDPGT, and that is an enzyme in the liver. So the next organ is going to be the liver. And so if you were to continue this process once again, you'd end up with liver, followed by gut, followed by kidney, which when you scroll down, ends up being option B. Now, the difference between proximal and distal colon, that's basically, there's a few hints about that in the first table, but really the main thing I want you guys to get out of this is whenever you're presented with information that's really confusing in the format that it's presented, try to present it in a different way. Draw yourselves diagrams, draw yourselves things that tend to make or clarify the process a little bit better, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat. Oh God, there's quite a few. The graphs of the scores, I can maybe show you at the end if we have time. Gabby says unit 2 broker. Yep, fair enough. Okay, I don't think there's any more questions. Do you think this requires prereq knowledge? Not really. This particular question definitely does not. The second unit, maybe a little bit, but I'll get to that in a second. Okay, I think I just want to leave this unit for now. The main concept or the main takeaway, because sorry, we don't have that much time, but the main concept being whenever you're presented with information in a confusing manner, try to convert that information into a process or something that makes a little bit more sense to you. Okay, so that's the first question. The second question, which is probably the most confusing one, and I'll try to go through all of these questions, is about the pistons, right? So assuming you've read the stem, which can be really hard to break down, and that's probably the most important skill in this particular unit, is breaking down the stem and breaking down each component. Once you've done that, you can sort of start to think about each question, okay? So I want you guys to contextualize every piece of information that you get in the GAMSAT. So when you're thinking about these pistons, try to actually imagine the experiment happening in real life and the kind of things that you would expect to see if you were doing this experiment, okay? What would it actually look like? So the main concept with this experiment is can be really understood from this diagram, okay? So what you're doing is you've got a piston, which is something that can move up and down. You've got an uncompressible fluid. That basically just means that if I was to press on the fluid, all the force is transmitted through that fluid. All the pressure is maintained the same. None of the fluid leaks out. The fluid doesn't somehow get magically smaller, anything like that. You start off with one area that's smaller and you end up in an area that's bigger. This is a basic concept in pistons. This is sort of the prereq knowledge you need to know. Just the idea that there's a transfer of pressure, which is dependent on area. And that's given, or it's hinted at really, by these two equations up here. So I know they're a little bit hard to see. Pressure is equal to force over area, and V equals A times D. Or the volume transferred is proportional to the area and the distance. Really the idea that if you have a small area, okay, this is small, you're gonna have a huge amount of pressure even if you have a small force, because the area is quite small. And so you can transmit the pressure, which is quite large, onto the larger area and cause a change in the distance that that piston moves, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So let me scroll down here. When you put a force here, so F in, the force out is actually the same, but you can transmit a greater pressure because, or the pressure going through it is sort of the same, but the pressure in this particular part is quite big because it's such a small area. That's sort of the main concept of this piston. So if that all makes sense, you can sort of begin to start doing each question. So for question 1, it's telling you that area 1 is being pushed down by 20 centimeters. Watch the change in area 2's height, okay? You need to have a little bit of intuition about which formulas you'd like to use, okay? So for this particular one, the only formula you need to use is the first formula. And I'll show you guys why. So for this particular question, you're going to start off with asking yourself, what is the ratio of the two different areas? Because that's really what I'm trying to get at, right? Because the ratio of the two different areas will tell you how much distance there is changing. So one thing I can say from the stem is that area 1 is equal to, or 4 times area 1 is equal to area 2. Sorry, no, that's not right. Area 1, because it's a circle, is pi r1 squared, okay? Because it's a circle, that transfers to that formula for the area. Area 2 is equal to pi bracket 4 times r1 squared. The reason you've got the 4 there is because in the stem, it tells you that the diameter of A2 is 4 times as large as the diameter of A1. So that's why you have to put the 4 in there. So that equals out to be 16 pi r1 squared, okay? I know it's a little bit of math, but just gotta get used to the GAMSAT math. And then basically from there, what you want to do is you've got the formula V equals AD. But basically, because the volume that's changing remains the same, what you can say is that A1 times D1, so the area in the first piston times the distance that it moves in the first piston, is equal to area of the second piston times the distance that the second piston moves. Okay, so you can sort of make them equivalent and then figure out what D2 is from there. So really now you just have to substitute everything in. So A1 we said was pi R1 squared. D1 was just 20 centimeters, so that's 0.2 meters. A2 was 16 pi R1 squared. And D2 is what we're trying to figure out. Okay, so the pi's cancel out. The R1 cancels out, the R1 squared cancels out, and you're left with 0.2 divided by 16 is equal to D2. So now you just have to estimate what that's going to be. A quick way of doing that is multiplying top and bottom by 10. So you get 2 on 160, which is the same as 1 on 80, which you can sort of round that up to be 1 over 100. But either way, it's closest to 0.01. So I know a little bit of math involved in there, which can be a bit confusing. But that's sort of how you get to the answer there. Sorry, I've stopped sharing my screen because I couldn't get rid of the writing. Okay, so that's question number 6. Question number 7 is a bit more intuitive. You don't have to do any math. You kind of just have to think logically about the question. So what I wrote for this one is think about a balloon, right? A balloon is full of gas. You can compress the balloon. And when you're holding it there, when you're applying that pressure, the balloon's not going anywhere. That's the equivalent of saying that when you compress the balloon, the gas absorbs the force that you're putting onto that balloon. The exact same concept is happening here. So they're saying instead of incompressible fluid, we replace it with gas. What would we expect to occur? Well, it's the exact same thing. If we replace it with a gas, that gas is going to absorb some of the force that we apply. And so if it absorbs some of the force, then there's less sort of force coming back up this way on the other side. And essentially what ends up being happening is that the force is absorbed, so the spring is compressed less than it normally would be. Okay, so if you think about the normal situation, you put this much force in, you get this much force out. If you have a compressible gas, you put this much force in, you know, that size arrow, but you only get a little bit coming out. So the spring is compressed a little bit less. So the correct answer for that one was B. And the last one was really, really tricky, but I'll try and explain as best as I can. So basically what you're doing is you're replacing this bucket C with 10 kilograms of weight. So then you need to figure out what's the force coming in, right? So the force coming in is the mass times gravity. So it's just the weight force, which is equal to 10 multiplied by 10. So 10 due to gravity, which comes out to be 100. And we don't have time, we've got a little bit longer, it's all good. Okay. So that's the force coming in. So the force coming down like this is about 100 newtons, okay? And then it's not too bad from here, but basically all you have to do is say, well, the ratio of the areas, so because of the difference in diameter, the ratio of the area was 1 to 16. So this area here is 16 times bigger. The area of A2 is 16 times bigger than the area of A1. Okay, so that means the amount of force coming out ends up being 1600 newtons. So you got 100 coming in, the area was 16 times bigger, so you get 1600 newtons comes out. And the reason why is because what you can say is that the pressure going in is equal to the pressure going out, so P1 equals P2, which translates to F1 on A1 equals F2 on A2. So that's from the formula that we were given earlier. Okay. And when you substitute in all the numbers, because of the ratio between A1 and A2, it works out to be that F2 is 16 times bigger than F1, which is essentially, it works out to be 1600 newtons. But that's not what we're trying to figure out. We now need to use the rest of the stem. So there was a little bit here about the force in the spring. So this bit here, about the force being the constant of the spring multiplied by the change in distance. So now you just need to substitute in some numbers. So you know the force going out is 1600. The spring constant is 100. And the change in distance is what you're trying to figure out. So just divide everything out. The change in distance is equal to 16. And so that's going to be in meters. So the correct answer for that one was D. Okay. I think the chat has been popping off. Let me see if there's any questions. You're going to get all of these explanations, by the way. Full written explanations, all the equations in there, you know, going through it a little bit more slowly so you can take your time to fully understand all of this. Because I know it can be a little bit confusing, me throwing all of this information at you. But yeah, let me try and answer some of these questions. So for section 3, is it better to go through concepts and then begin practice questions or learn concepts along the way? I personally think it's much better to learn concepts along the way because you don't need to learn every single concept. You just need to learn the ones that tend to come up more often or the ones that you particularly struggle with. So we at Halad love the process of reflection. So when you do practice section 3 questions, practice them out, try to learn from them, and then reflect on your progress, reflect on how you're going, reflect on what you find difficult, and then work on that. How can we do all of this in our head since we have to take the exam on the computer? Yep, a little bit tricky. I think you do get a little bit of paper to write on so that you can do some equations and stuff, as I understand it, which answers the next question as well. Okay. Sarah, do I have time to go through the last one?
No, but we can record your explanation after this and add it to the recording if you like.
I can just explain very quickly what I'd like the students to understand about it. So with any question that's about a process, all you need to know is that if you cancel one part of the process, how is that going to affect what else is happening in the diagram or the process? So for example, if I have an issue at this point in the pathway, there's going to be most likely upregulation of this arm of the pathway. If I have a breakdown of the enzyme here, then there's going to be upregulation of these other molecules or other compounds. Okay, so that's really the most important thing to note about a diagram like this, which is basically just whenever you see a diagram like this, try to break it down into its individual arms and think about what happens if you were to change something about that pathway. How would that affect the rest of the pathway? You guys did pretty well on this particular question as well. So I think I'm going to leave this question, leave you guys to read through the explanations. But yeah, by far the most tricky question we did today was this one here. Go through the math that you get in the explanation, take your time, and just focus on the major concepts that are used in questions like this, because these sorts of questions tend to come up again and again where they're trying to expect you to take that next step. They're not going to sort of walk you through it. They're going to expect you to figure out how to get to the right answer. Okay. But I think I've gone over time, so I'll leave it there. Back to you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much, Karim and Gabby, for joining me this evening and helping make this a really fantastic mini mock. And hopefully you've all had a great experience as well, giving it a go. Thank you so much for coming along. Just to finish up a few final things from us tonight. So firstly, yay, you did it. You're here, congrats. So what I would love to see in the chat is one thing that you've either learned from doing the mini mock with us this evening, or something that you're going to do next. So a goal or something you have. And also if you have any questions or you want some help with any of those goals, then send us emails. We're happy to hear from you, and they're all there for you as well. So please put those in the chat. We'd love to see them and love to hear feedback from you. Also, just a little side note, I did deliberately choose questions and stems for this mini mock tonight that would be harder than previous ones we've done. I chose ones that previous students have found very hard. So don't be hard on yourself if you feel like that was a lot. I did that on purpose to give you a go and give you something a little bit challenging. So huge pat on the back and well done for giving it a try, and super grateful for you all coming along. So we've just got a couple of last minute things that we'd like to let you know about. We have a bunch of free resources that you can use. We have a lot of recordings from our previous mini mocks. If you haven't seen them, we've run some masterclasses. I know it can feel overwhelming, so if you're confused about what resources to use, we have them all sort of laid out for you online. So jump over to our Facebook page and you can check them all out there. We also have an interactive calendar if you would like to know what upcoming events there are that we're running and other things that you might be interested in the GAMSAT space. And finally, something that's coming up quite soon are our 6-week courses. A few of you we've seen have already signed up. We're very excited to have you join in. If you'd like to join in, we would love to have you there. These are the courses that our students find the most helpful. There's 6 weeks. We do one for each section, and we also do mock exams at the end if you'd like to sign up for those as well. And it's the best practice that you can get because you'll get 2 hours a week plus outside time to do homework and other things. You'll have a tutor and a small class so that you can ask your questions and you can improve on techniques and get a lot of exposure to questions and to different STEM types and techniques that you can use. So highly recommend doing the intensives. We try to make sure that they are as affordable as possible for you. And so part of that as well is a gift for you tonight for coming along. Usually we have a 10% off discount if you bring a friend or sign up with a friend, but we've noticed it's hard for you to come to an online event with a friend. And so because of that tonight, if you'd like to sign up for one of our courses, then email Carleen. Her email is just here on the slide, and let her know using Friendless Friend discount, and you can get 10% off the intensives. You just need to sign up within the next 48 hours. And also we will mark an essay for you. You can either finish off the one that you did tonight, or you can send us another one that you really want some feedback on, and we'll help you there. So just to finish up, I wanted to have a little look at what you've all put in. One thing I learned tonight, physics is really hard. I should revise it. Thanks, Gabby. Always write to the overall theme of the quotes. I love that, and that will serve you so well. Maybe you can give that a go with the next essay that you write. I feel much more confident about section 1. Thank you. Awesome. So glad to hear that there are different ways to answer the question. And for section 2, plan, but don't waste time planning. That is so true. It's so valuable. Yes. And so just to finish up, we have a feedback form that we'd love you to fill out if you could. While you're filling it out, we're just going to play one of our mission videos to finish off. If you'd like to join us on one of our missions, something in this video looks like something you'd be really interested in, then you can also send an expression of interest to the link below on the screen. So then you can put your name down and we can get back to you when our missions are up and running again. And yes, if you've already signed up for something, send me an email and I'll sort that out for you so that you can also benefit. So thank you so much for coming along tonight. We really appreciate it. And I'll put my email in the chat as well. Actually, Eliza, thank you. And we'll just play this video for you to finish off. Amazing. I don't think it's going to load. That's all right. Maybe if I...
That is so bizarre.
Also, if no one worked out that Eliza and I are sitting next to each other by now, maybe like more of them. Well, thank you so much for coming along, and we hope to see you soon, either at some of our next events or at our intensives. And yeah, we're really grateful that you all came along and gave it a go.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.
It's all right.